Not long after the 2020 election, I said something on C-SPAN that was absolutely true. We just ran the most secure, transparent, and verified election in American history by any objective measurement. The 2020 election was more deserving of our trust than any other election in our history. I was far from alone in saying this.
On November 12, 2020, government and industry representatives from the election security community issued a joint statement reflecting a consensus perspective that the 2020 election was the most secure in U.S. history.
That was Christopher Krebs, director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in the Trump administration. The consensus of experts in election security said 2020 was not just secure, but the most secure ever. This was an amazing accomplishment, and it didn't just happen. A lot of good people had been working hard for years to keep our democracy on the rails. They did so in the face of a global pandemic, the ongoing threat of foreign interference, and a firestorm of misinformation and disinformation, managing the highest voter turnout in American history. So when the 2020 election crossed the finish line intact, secure and verified, the people inside the election community, the ones in the best position to appreciate just how well it had gone, felt a wave of happiness and relief. It didn't last. Even well before 2020, voter confidence was under attack. The winning presidential candidate in 2016 spread lies about having won the popular vote and false claims of widespread fraud. At the same time, a political mythology began to grow among his supporters, that a so-called deep state network of bureaucrats existed within the federal government, especially in the CIA and FBI, working to undermine the Trump administration from within and to prevent his re-election. It hasn't just been fringe media making these claims. Mac Warner of West Virginia, a sitting Secretary of State, claimed as recently as February 2024 that the CIA and FBI colluded to steal the 2020 election from Donald Trump. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has also aggressively questioned the legitimacy of Biden's win, opening scores of baseless election crimes cases. Such prominent endorsements of election denial have had a profound impact. Although there has not been a shred of evidence of widespread fraud or election problems in 2020 presented to any court in the country, about half of all American voters now doubt that elections can be trusted. And we see multiple candidates refusing to accept the outcome of elections. How did we end up here?
John F. Kennedy has been elected President of the United States.
The American people have spoken, and they have spoken clearly.
That was a rigged election.
We will shut the country down.
A disinformation campaign.
We're going to hang you.
There is nowhere I feel safe.
We're not going to allow the harassment of the election workers to continue.
It has to stop.
This is The Count. I'm David Becker. There was a time when election administration was honestly pretty boring. It's fundamentally about counting, after all. And with the exception of the hanging chads and butterfly ballots of the 2000 election, we'll talk about that later. For most people, the actual process of electing our leaders and representatives has stayed well below the radar. There have always been important questions about equal access to the ballot box, drawing district lines, all those things that precede the actual process of voting. But the vote itself, win or lose on election day, happy or sad, the process itself rarely drew much attention. That changed gradually, then all at once, after the most secure and verified election we'd ever had.
This colossal expansion of mail-in voting opened the floodgates to massive fraud.
Showing examples of ballot irregularities.
Trump is still your president.
They are alleging this is one county, Wayne County, Michigan. They are saying that there was a batch of ballots where 60% had the same signature. They are saying that 35 ballots had no voter record, but they were counted anyway, that 50 ballots were wrong.
Every election has winners and losers. So every election is followed by disappointment and even anger from a lot of people. Millions of people when it's a national election. But this furious conviction that a massive conspiracy had stolen an American election from the rightful winner, that was new. But it didn't come from nowhere. So much has happened in American politics in recent years that it can be hard to really put yourself back at the beginning. But the seeds of our current cultural mess were planted many years ago. This podcast has a single purpose: to give you the tools to help our nation restore the confidence Americans once had in the way we elect our leaders. We really do need your help to do this. There's no way a bunch of well-meaning nonprofits or politicians or celebrities are going to get us back to the place we were just a generation ago. It's going to take active citizenship from all of us for as long as it takes. There have been attacks on voter confidence before, but the most serious attacks are recent. To understand how those who fear and oppose democracy intended to first shake and then shatter our confidence in our system of government, let's go to St. Mary Parish on Louisiana's Gulf Coast at 8:30 a.m. on September 11th, 2014. Duval Arthur, the director of the Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness for the parish, was suddenly getting dozens of calls from residents who had received a disturbing text message. "Toxic fume hazard warning in this area until 1:30 p.m., it said. "Take shelter. Check local media and columbiachemical.com. Arthur was mystified. None of his people had sent the alert. And though Columbian Chemicals, slightly different from the website in the alert you'll notice, was just down the road from his office, he'd heard no explosion or sirens and had received no calls from the plant or local law enforcement. At the same time, scores of accounts on Twitter were posting about a huge explosion at Columbian Chemicals. Some included a screenshot of the story on CNN.com. Others had the front page of the New Orleans Times-Picayune with a picture of the plant in flames. There were dozens of stories shared directly from the websites of other local news organizations. Click through and you'd see websites with articles including eyewitness accounts of the disaster and videos capturing the explosion from several angles. The story began trending on Twitter when a video appeared with masked ISIS fighters standing next to a looped video of the explosion. Just one problem. When Duval Arthur called the plant, he was told there had been no explosion, no leak, no incident of any kind. Quick check of CNN.com showed that the screenshot had been fake. Same with the Times-Picayune. Arthur eventually dismissed it as a prank by someone with a sick sense of humor. But prank doesn't begin to capture this event. This was a complex, coordinated campaign of disinformation. Nearly 100 new Twitter accounts had each posted dozens of tweets about the event, and the other news organizations were exact clones of existing local websites. There were staged eyewitness accounts and faked videos, including the fake ISIS fighters. A complete Wikipedia page was created, linking back to the videos and stories. The time, manpower, and expertise required to pull this off was breathtaking. But once the story was debunked and corrections issued, always an incomplete and ineffective process, two questions continued to hang in the air. Who did it? And even more puzzling, why? What could the motivation be for such a sophisticated hoax in a small, quiet backwater town? As similar hoaxes popped up around the country, an Ebola scare, a fake police shooting, the who began to come into focus. Many of the social media accounts involved were traced to Russian servers. The why took longer, but eventually became clear. The chemical leak, the Ebola scare, the police shooting, they were all tests of a new Russian strategy to attack, weaken, and divide the U.S. as the 2016 presidential election approached. Russia engaging in cyber attacks on the U.S. was hardly new.
One of the ways that you can think about Russian disinformation campaigns is that they're very good at taking the technological communication environment available to them and incorporating it into a strategy.
Renée DiResta is the research manager of the Stanford Internet Observatory and an expert on state-sponsored information warfare.
Social media becomes additive to other tactical playbooks that they have already used for decades. The way that we describe this is using the phrase full spectrum propaganda. What's happening here is a very, very old dynamic, which is unattributed propaganda put out on a new type of platform, which is social media. And then the recognition that you can make it a very, very participatory environment by getting the real public to come in and participate as well.
In summer 2016, Russians gained access to Illinois' statewide voter registration database. They were inside the database, undetected, for about 3 weeks. Now, unlike ballots themselves, voter registration records are not secret, and they go through a regular process of reconfirmation. There are regular backups. So if anyone tried to delete or alter a significant number of them, it's almost certain that would have been detected and fixed. But if an intrusion happened right before a major election, such a thing could cause real chaos. People might show up to the polls to find their voter registration record had been altered, causing long lines and potentially putting their ability to vote at risk. But this was months before the election, and the Russians did not attempt to alter or delete data. They just explored and probed. Then, after a few weeks undetected, they suddenly hugely amplified the number of records they were accessing, a magnitude sure to be discovered. And sure enough, administrators detected the intrusion and shut the whole system down. No voter records were affected, but the nature of this attack suggested that wasn't even the point. Like St. Mary Parish before it, Illinois was a strange target. Chaos might have an effect in a swing state, but Illinois is deep blue territory, and this was months before the election anyway. Plenty of time to repair any damage done by the attack. There's only one plausible explanation. The Russians wanted to be detected. Changing the outcome of the election was not the goal of hacking the Illinois database. The target wasn't votes or ballots. The target was us, or more specifically, our brains, our confidence. They wanted the government, the media, and the American public to know that they had gained access to election infrastructure, and to believe that efforts to destabilize our elections were far more widespread than they actually were. The targets of these attacks were not so much the databases and infrastructure itself, but the confidence and trust of the American people in their own elections. From there, it was a short step to distrusting the leaders and representatives chosen by those elections, and the whole system that underpins that process, even our identity as Americans. Weeks after the Illinois hack, the successful hack of the emails of the Democratic National Committee was further proof that we were vulnerable.
And as we mentioned, CBS News has confirmed again the FBI is now investigating the hack that led to the leak of Democratic National Committee emails. For more
it was then,
this,
in the late summer of 2016, in this environment of hypervigilance and distrust, that I founded the Center for Election Innovation and Research to inform voters about our election system and ease the path toward the participation of all eligible voters, and help election officials defend against the threat of foreign interference and disinformation that sought to further divide the country. Foreign interference was real, but as it turned out, Russia wasn't hacking our votes. It was hacking our confidence in our system of government. The strange hoax in St. Mary Parish had been a test of a new version of a very old strategy called psychological operations. In the run-up to the 2016 election, Russian agencies created accounts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and used those accounts not to promote a specific candidate or cause, but to sow discord and make social and political divisions in the United States worse. The Illinois system hack was a diversion. While our attention was focused on preventing cyber attacks, Russia was engaged in a much older game. turning citizens against each other and making us question our reality. Anything used to manipulate the attitudes, behaviors, or decision-making of an enemy is a form of psychological operation. Genghis Khan had his soldiers tie branches to the tails of their horses to kick up more dust, making his advancing armies appear larger than they were. Leaflets were dropped by U.S. planes on German cities in World War II to demoralize enemy soldiers, while Tokyo Rose did the same to U.S. soldiers in the Pacific by radio. Even the Trojan horse was a similar deception that caused the city of Troy to drop its guard and welcome in the very thing that would be its undoing. Russia's Trojan horse was actually a vast herd of horses, and they weren't sneaking in the back gate. They were galloping into American life in broad daylight. Advertising, political campaigns, phishing emails. All of these employ techniques to manipulate you, to make you think and feel and do things you might not otherwise do. According to the report prepared by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, Russian attempts to plant disinformation on social media began as early as 2014, mostly through Russian military intelligence, all in the guise of ordinary Americans. The New York Times told the story of Melvin Reddick of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, looking wholesome in his Facebook profile picture, in a backward baseball cap, holding a smiling little girl in his arms. On June 6, 2016, Melvin posted a link to a story on his Facebook feed. "These guys show hidden truth about Hillary Clinton, George Soros, and the other leaders of the U.S., he wrote. Visit DC Leaks website, it's really interesting." You know where this is going. Investigations into Russian disinformation found no Melvin Reddick in Pennsylvania. The high school he claimed to have attended had no record of him, and the photos he used were pilfered from the account of a man in Brazil. It was just one of hundreds or thousands of smiling faces blanketing social media with false stories created by a Russian disinformation campaign designed to destabilize American democracy. In 2017, the campaign gained a terrifying new dimension. More than 10,000 Twitter users in the Department of Defense received phishing emails individually crafted to their interests. Clicking on a link installed malware that allowed the Russian agency to take over the phone, computer, and Twitter account of the employee. Although the hacks were quickly discovered and corrected, the incident raised the specter of a foreign disinformation campaign that seemed to bear the authority of the U.S. military. By 2020, there were countless messages specifically attacking our elections during the COVID pandemic. False stories were published and promoted, claiming a history of rampant voter fraud that did not exist. In September 2020, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, the Trump DHS, warned that, quote, Russia is likely to continue amplifying criticisms of vote by mail and shifting voting processes amidst the COVID-19 pandemic to undermine public trust in the electoral process, unquote. After the election, the disinformation campaign pivoted to baseless but elaborate and detailed claims of voter fraud in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, and other swing states, narratives that were picked up and amplified by fringe media. The intention of this multifaceted campaign was to sow division and confusion in the American public. So how'd they do? Although we certainly weren't singing around the campfire of peace and harmony before 2014, there are countless indicators that the tensions that existed before that disinformation campaign exploded from that point forward. And by 2016, in the wake of its phenomenal success turning Americans against each other, Russia's objective went from general chaos to a more specific goal, running a large-scale campaign to influence the U.S. presidential election. This disinformation campaign used something that one study called the fire hose of falsehood model, assaulting Americans through an overwhelming number of channels with rapid, continuous, and repetitive messages. Research on propaganda has shown that multiple sources are more persuasive than a single source. Sharing into social media spaces took advantage of a multiplier effect, as friends and family reshared the message. This tapped into another research finding. When the volume of information is low, recipients favor expert opinion. But when the volume is high and a fire hose of information is coming our way, we tend to favor information from other users, especially those who are known to us. The information now has the endorsement of trusted others. Equally important is something researchers call anchoring bias, our tendency to more strongly accept the first information we hear about a topic, known as the anchor, than to favor that information over later contradictory messages. A troll farm dealing in fake narratives can get stories out much more quickly than a reputable outlet hobbled by editing and careful fact-checking. And once that early anchor is set, anchoring bias makes it hard to dislodge. All of these are reinforced by confirmation bias, the simple fact that we are more inclined to believe something if we want it to be true. Finally, repetition drills the message home. Repetition makes it familiar, and familiarity leads to acceptance. The multiplier effect, the endorsement of trusted others, anchoring bias, confirmation bias, repetition, all of these were carefully studied tools in the toolkit of the disinformation campaign. Russian troll farms were connected to efforts to encourage angry protests, both for and against racial justice efforts such as Black Lives Matter, in places like Houston, hoping angry protesters would conflict with each other. Elsewhere, people invented false stories saying Pope Francis had endorsed Trump and Clinton had murdered a DNC staffer. Just before Election Day, a story took off alleging that Clinton and her aides ran a pedophile ring in the basement of a DC pizza parlor. Facebook's internal investigation found that content from Russian agencies reached as many as 126 million Americans on its platform during the 2016 election cycle. Twitter found and suspended more than 2,700 accounts that it believed were connected to Russia. Different strategies were used, including the creation of fake social media accounts and pages that would spread disinformation and propaganda. These accounts often pretended to be American citizens, and they promoted extremist views, spread conspiracy theories, or circulated false information about political candidates. They organized and promoted political rallies, often on both sides of contentious issues, in an effort to incite conflict and division. A march for Trump in New York in June, a support Hillary rally in DC in July, then Down with Hillary in New York. After the election, a Trump is not my president rally in New York, and Charlotte against Trump in North Carolina. Printed signs were on hand, prepared speeches were given. A woman was paid to dress as Hillary in prison garb behind bars. A man was paid to dress as Trump in prison garb behind bars. These were all real events with real Americans participating, all covered by the media, all designed to stoke divisions, and all conceived and paid for by a Russian agency. At the same time, Russian accounts were flooding social media with posts claiming Antifa was engaging in violent clashes with police, warning that the burqa was spreading across the U.S., and promoting Confederate pride. By spreading disinformation and increasing polarization, the actors behind this campaign aimed to destabilize the U.S., weakening its global standing and making it easier for Russia to achieve its own geopolitical goals. This type of interference in another country's political affairs, particularly through the use of information warfare, is not new, but social media has made it possible on an unprecedented scale. When 13 Russian nationals were indicted by the Mueller probe for attempts to disrupt the U.S. political process, evidence included an email written by one defendant to a family member. "I created all these pictures and posts," it said, and the Americans believed that it was written by their people. Psychological warfare is insidious. It acts on our minds instead of our bodies, making both the damage and the cause harder to pin down. Psychological wounds are murkier, harder to assess and clean and heal, but no less devastating. An American who feels anger and resentment toward her neighbor of a different political persuasion usually can't identify the moment that anger began or where it came from. Even if she learns that a foreign adversary placed divisive messages in her mind, there's no easy way to sort through the files, pull out the wrong ones, and move forward with a clean perspective. Our minds are less a filing cabinet than a tapestry of story. One of the defining features of the human mind is the continuous creation of what research psychologist Dan McAdams calls narrative identity, a coherent story into which we can comfortably embed ourselves. As much as we'd like to think of our senses and minds as faithful recorders of reality, it is never true. Every perception and data point passes through a subjective filter of our own bias, and our identity emerges as a continuous story. Psychological operations take full advantage of the storytelling feature of being human. Every new piece of information becomes a thread woven into the tapestry of our identity. It's part of who we are. Even if you learn that some of those threads were put there maliciously, pulling them out of the fabric of your own opinions is easier said than done. Even if we doubt the lies being spread, the atmosphere created by such relentless attacks can lead us to doubt everything, even truths for which there is compelling evidence. And the problem goes beyond false claims that are taken as true. Renée DiResta.
We've also hit a point where it's now relatively easy to simply say that something is AI generated, whether it is or is not. And so the flip side of this is content that is real that is not going to be trusted. So you will have both sides of this challenge of unreality, this challenge of perception. And again, this is why I think it comes down very much to the bigger problem being not what the technology makes possible, but the sort of trust environment in which it's received.
So when we ask, how'd the Russians do? By taking advantage of our existing fault lines, the campaign to sow division in the U.S. by turning us on each other probably worked even better than they had hoped. We are badly shattered. The question now is, how do we put ourselves back together?
David Becker is the founder and executive director of the nonpartisan nonprofit Center for Election Innovation and Research, working with election officials of both parties to ensure accessible, secure elections for all eligible voters. He also manages the Election Official Legal Defense Network, providing pro bono legal assistance to election officials who are threatened with frivolous criminal prosecution, harassment, or physical violence. He has served as director of the elections program at the Pew Charitable Trusts and was a senior trial attorney in the voting section of the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice. David serves as election law expert for CBS News and is the co-author, with CBS News chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett, of the book The Big Truth: Upholding Democracy in the Age of the Big Lie. If you'd like to support the important work of the Center for Election Innovation and Research, promoting elections that voters should and do trust, visit electioninnovation.org/donate. The Count with David Becker is a production of the Center for Election Innovation and Research. Learn more at electioninnovation.org.